Hi, hello, and welcome to the library. Hi, Ellie. Oh, I hope that you are doing very, very good today. I am so nervous for some reason. Because it's a special stream. I think we haven't had like a stream like this in a long time. Last time we had kind of like a presentation stream. I think it was probably like before the 2.0. It should have been the Moming stream, actually. Moming in Japan. And so I guess we are kind of like back into this very little thing that is like a presentation and kind of like more serious stream. You have done your homework. Again, it was not mandatory. So if you have done it, I hope that, it's for yourself and not for me, because I'm not grading it. It's for your own pleasure of like reading text and stuff. But yeah, like I spent like the past week or so, well, I guess like, 3-4 days, kind of like reading the text again and again and again, trying to, I don't know, do the most I could in terms of analysis and stuff. And it was very funny because it brought me back to my uni years. And I felt like, oh, I'm getting old, right? Like I haven't done that in such a long time. And it's so weird coming to it again in such a similar way. So yeah, I guess it's just a moment of nostalgia for me too. Although, like, again, I feel pretty nervous the way I was nervous for like exams back in the days. We had like those talking exams, right? Like where you would be presented like a excerpt that you don't know about. The uni bio streamer, that's crazy. Like you would be presented an excerpt that you don't know about, and you have approximately like half an hour to do your analysis, and then you need to present that like in a clean manner to your teacher or whatever. And we used to do that like quite often, like once every, I guess, like month and a half back then, and it was like pretty stressful because this grade would like count for like a lot. But yeah, hi Sigrid. I hope that you're doing great today. Also, like something that is quite interesting is that like this type of like commentary on a text is very much like a how can I say that, like one-to-one with your teacher thing in uni. Like normally when you are in a literary curriculum in France, you don't do like close analysis like this. Most our essays or dissertation or essays like on a quote, not like of a literary text, but of a literary critic. So it's like more of a meta literature or critical theory dissertation essay, which is done like in 5 or 6 hours. So it has been like quite funny, like to come back to actually like analyzing like a text very, very closely. You just finished cooking some food, so you already, I hope that you had fun cooking. I admit that I wanted to cook like a little bit before, but I was too nervous and I wanted to go over my notes again. So I had like some leftovers just, earlier today, and I'll probably cook later after stream if I'm not completely dead. But yeah, so what's the point of like today? And I will like shift us immediately to the other scene. Close analysis is so last decade. We are close at analysis now. I mean, isn't that like vibe checking in some ways? Okay, so I'll also like, after the end of this track, I'll stop the music so we can hear ourselves talk. And so I can kind of explain what we're doing today. So you can see also to my left that we have a new friend. Our Mafia Cheetah is actually changing his glasses to be a nerd, to be a teacher today. So he will be my companion on this stream to illuminate, to illuminate the stream with knowledge and wisdom. I do not know if it is the same character or if it is, you know, another cheetah. You can make up the lore for yourself. Don't even worry about it. Please add that emote. I just need to crop because let me like remove the thing so you can see. I have not like cropped the cheetah out, so I'll do that like later. But I'll add the cheetah teacher emote. I don't know if we have. We'll see like what space we have in the. Probably no. We should have like space now since we're affiliate. But yeah, I'll do that later, and I'll add that also like on the server as well. So for today, the plan is basically to go through the excerpt. So if you have like opened the link, you know that it is a very long excerpt. By the way, you can find like the text if you need it. The link is on the Discord server, obviously, but I think exclamation mark text will also give you a link to it if you need to check what is going there. Cheetah, but reading many Dynasty Scans manga, that is what you are becoming when you are reading Yuri and Yaoi manga. So, you know, you are, transitioning from being like a mafia member to, I guess, a nerd. So yeah, the point is to go through this excerpt together. I will not offer a close analysis of the text, and by close analysis I mean, checking sentences one by one, checking paragraphs one by one, because I think the excerpt is very long, and also close analysis is kind of like what you do, at least in France. That's what you're taught to do at the start of your work, but when you're actually communicating the result of your analysis, you need to shuffle a little bit the elements so that it is in a more constructed argument. So I'll kind of like go through the questions that I asked on the Discord server when I posted the text, and we'll try to illuminate certain very specific passages with contextual information, but also like a literary analysis, a sociological analysis, a more like critical theory analysis. So this is not meant to be a perfect analysis of this excerpt, because we could talk about a text, for hours, for weeks, and that's kind of like the point of literary analysis, literary theory. I'm not saying that my vision of the text is the correct one, but I want at least to open windows on new information that can give some more meaning to the text. So if anything, it's just a showcase of like what we can do when we are doing literary analysis, and also how much it is able to, in my opinion, like open windows on the world, onto the world like around us. Shuffle the elements sounds like a Yu-Gi-Oh spell card. Maybe literal analysis is just playing like Yu-Gi-Oh, and every time someone is rebuting your argument, then you activates your trap card, and you can follow up with more authority arguments. Even Miyabi, we're gonna analyze this text every stream for the next couple of years. I mean, we could analyze the entirety of like this novel, because I think it's like a beautiful, beautiful novel. It's not my favorite of like Michiko Ishimure. I prefer like Lake of Heaven, but we could do that, and that could be like super interesting because it fits very, very closely with my own interest, and also my research on rivers and stuff. But I am not evil to this degree, so you will be spared an entire analysis of the whole novel. It is what it is. I will blossom anyone trying to dispute my arguments. This is crazy work. Okay, also, I don't think you can see like my cursor, so I will have to change that very quickly. Oh, wait, you should be able to. Well, oh, you no, okay, you can see it. It's just it was not, I was not focused on the window. Okay, so we'll start immediately. So if you, okay, there might be, a chance that you fall asleep. Nerd cheetah high, sky high. There might be a chance that you fall asleep in the first like 20, 30 minutes of the stream because we'll read the entire excerpt. I think the point of like literary analysis beyond understanding the text is also communing with the text. It's an opportunity to be serious about it and to take our time. I think when we read, it's very easy, especially if like you're a very fast reader, to just go very diagonally over the text and kind of like not let the text breathe and exist. And I kind of want this stream to be an opportunity to listen to the text a little bit closely. If we fall asleep, will there be a wake-up alarm in 30 minutes? I'll use the Namu Amida Butsu in 30 minutes. Don't worry about it. And by the way, please do not use like the Namu Amida Butsu during the thing. Else I'm like disabling the command. Diagonal, now I read all edges. So true. So yeah, I'll read the entire excerpt. I'll try to do like a sort of like recitation of it. It will be a bit long, you need to expect that to be like 20 minutes or so because it's a very long excerpt. But I want you to get like immersed in the storytelling of like Ishimure because I think it will be very useful to then be able to talk about the text. So again, you have the text on screen because obviously, like I'm having it like on screen so we can take notes and stuff, like write things on the pages, highlight some parts of the text. You have to hold the Amina Butsu, please, not like in the middle of like the explanations. Like I am not, I don't want to be the stern teacher. I don't want to be the stern librarian, but if I need to disable the command, I will disable the command. What do I wanted to say? I can't even remember what I was going to say. So yeah, you have the text on screen. You can follow on the screen, but if you want to follow the text on your own, like kind of like scroll however you want, feel free again to open like the PDF on your computer and to I don't know, work with me, highlight things with me if you're that insane and you think it's cool. It's not school, it's just me talking about literature because it's something that I like to do. And we haven't done that in a very long time. Okay, so I'll give context about Ishimure, this book, and kind of like why it was written. It is a redemption arc for all the teachers I've annoyed in my life. This is crazy. So I'll give context about like everything after the recitation, but for now, let's try to get like immersed in the text. One does not simply declare themselves enlightening without first understanding all the scriptures. Very, very true. Okay. So I've put also like the table of contents of like the book that might be interesting. We'll kind of like go back to it a little bit just because I think the structure of the book is quite interesting. But obviously we're only analyzing, as you have seen, chapter 7, Umawari no Tomo. That is situated kind of like in the second half of the book. And I think that this is kind of like a pivotal section of the story of Sea and the story, sorry, of the Sea of Camelias. And by the way, I'll call this book Camellias just as like a shortcut because the title is like a little bit longer. So I'll call it like Camellias or like Tsubaki in Japanese, depending on like, however I feel at said moment. Okay, so you should be able to see the text. Let's start with it. Chapter 7, Umawari no Tomo. What a strange thing is a road. From my own observation and the fact that I was often told that a road of Sakaimachi had eaten up all our property, I gradually formed a picture of it in my mind as an insatiable monster, which was always masticating something between its jaws. It seemed to me that the vomit of drunkards, the excrement of dogs, cats, horses, and cows, as well as the remains of rats, earthworms, beetles, butterflies, and cicadas, which were always scattered on the road, had been disgorged by this voracious monster. Whenever I walked on it, wondering at the unexpected discoveries I would make at almost every step, I would also imagine it as a miraculous living strip of earth in which were incised in a disorderly, tangled fashion the fascinating messages of both animate and inanimate beings. That road was, after all, a vibrating link between life and death, which possessed, in spite of its crudity, a haunting, transcending beauty of its own. From my babyhood, when Haruno would lay me to sleep in the shade of the trees in the mountain field, I had experienced a deep awe at the mystery of nature, at the ceaseless movement and unfathomable breadth and depth of the universe. I used to think that if the road of Sakaimachi, on which I was growing up, was extended on and on until the border of this vast world I could never hope to reach, it would, once finished, raise its monstrous snake head with a hiss and start to look around for its architect. I would have hair-raising nightmares in which the monster road opened its hideous, enormous mouth to swallow our property, our house, and all of us. And these visions were certainly influenced not only by the stories about the road told by my family with mixed feelings of bitterness and pride, but also by my ignorance at that time of the fact that landed property could be converted into money. There was another narrow road, a path rather, which crossed the rice fields at the back of the side of the road where we lived, going towards the sea. Whenever I took this old, slender, lonely path, on which hardly anyone ever ventured after the construction of the broader, more convenient road of Sakaimachi, I was seized with a strong desire to see the blue expanse of the sea. Leaving the rice fields behind, I came to the abandoned red brick building of Chiso's old factory, which, like a wrecked hulk on a deserted beach, was slowly crumbling to pieces. Bits of brick and dust had fallen into the clear water of the ditch in front of the factory, which swarmed with whirligig beetles, roach, dace, and big carp. As I approached, the schools of fish suddenly swung round with a splash and started to swim vigorously in the opposite direction. Violently stirred, the layer of water seemed to twitch, changing color in accordance with the movement of the fish, absorbing radiance, as it were, from their flashing scales. As I watched this in fascination, I suddenly had the vision that the gates of the luminous kingdom of the fish opened in front of me, inviting me in. A profusion of small, nearly transparent shrimp and loach, which raised from time to time little jets made of minute particles of mud, which dispersed again with great rapidity, swam back and forth through the abundant growth of aquatic plants, swaying incessantly on the bottom of the stream. There were also round and conic black snails and freshwater clams, which looked like wide-open eyes. After walking for a while along the ditch, I reached the quiet, sheltered beach of Shiohama, on which stood a little temple dedicated to Kannon. A tall pine tree stretched its branches, through which the sea breeze passed with a faint wail, like an enormous parasol above the lonely structure. Why did a sparkling, limpid solitude always crawl up to me and furl itself around me like a scarf of chilly water whenever I came to this temple? Was it because it stood on a remote, deserted beach, which seemed to build the forbidding boundary beyond which there was nothing but sea, or maybe still patiently waiting death, or maybe something darker, something more terrifying than death itself? Whatever the realms linked, or should I say separated by the solitary beach, with its little temple and huge pine tree, the durable crystal-like sadness and melancholy of the place was always poignantly brought home to me by the wail of the wind blowing from the sea. It seemed to me that this wind had not only the familiar salty taste of the sea, but also that, much harder to define, of the fragile cell containing disproportionate desires, the microcosm in perpetual transformation that was human existence. And wasn't the beach of Shiohama, after all, the boundary between two endless series of worlds strung on the chain of karma, both filled with both inexpressible beauty and unbearable misery, both equally evanescent? As I drift deeper and deeper into this terribly disquieting vision, my eyes suddenly fell on the thick, deeply furrowed bark of the old pine tree, which, probably because of its air of impenetrable, overwhelming solidity, somehow catapulted me back into reality. I lingered for a while in front of the temple, and then, turning towards Mount Gorgon, where the shrine of the mountain god stood, I bowed and paid my respects to it. It was as if I was saying goodbye to the baffling world of humans. I started to walk towards the dike of Umawari no Tomo. The clusters of houses I passed on the way already looked like fishing villages. The little stream flowing between the fields became gradually larger. The faint breeze drifting over from it smelled more and more like the sea, and the plants trembling under its surface looked more and more like seaweed. By the time I could definitely identify the latter as green laver or related species, I had already reached a little promontory with the beach of Kamenokubi, whose rocks irradiated the ripe, rust-colored stillness of late autumn. After crossing it, I finally entered the tall, dense forest of reeds of Umawari no Tomo. In the afternoon, these grasses sparkled in rich golden-brown tones. Their continuous growth was interrupted here and there by thickets of oleoasters, whose tiny vermilion fruits gleamed like pearls. At their roots bloomed an extravagance of blue spirea and chrysanthemum, which glowed in the deepening sunset with such incomparable beauty that the whole dike, already saturated with the radiance of autumn, seemed to have turned into a horizontal, trembling rainbow, which grew paler at one end until it merged into the sea. In that magical instant, it wasn't difficult, it seemed to me, to become a white fox's cub. All I had to do was bend my hands inwards in imitation of the latter's forepaws and cry, "Kon, kon," and the metamorphosis would occur. I tilted my head and listened intently. The rustle of the waving eulalias mingled in infinitely sweet, cool harmony with the lap of the gentle waves of the sea breaking against the dike. "Kon, kon, kon," I cried again, and squatted down among the golden-tinted wild chrysanthemums, which gave off a pleasant scent. I had often heard marvelous stories from the old woman in town about foxes' weddings, when splendid processions passed at night on the dike, illuminating their way with lanterns. Plucking some flowers, I tore off their petals and sprinkled them over my head, just like the cubs accompanying the wedding procession. Shall I become one of them or not? And if I become one, how shall I return to my former shape again? The dike of Umawari no Tomo, which was situated on the farthest end of the town, described a long arch along the seashore, starting from the village of Marushima and ending at the village of Hachiman Funazu, which was protected not only by the gods Hachiman and Tametomo, but also by the dragon god Hachidai, the tutelary deity of divination, and Inari, the fox god. Given its position, the dike served for regulating the in and outflow of the tide, creating a large tidal basin for the whole area. If one went on along the beach from Hachiman Funazu, crossed the Minamata River and then the little dike on which stood the shrine of Kojin, the god of the kitchen, one arrived at the crematory. From there, one could proceed further in the direction of the promontory of Usagigahana, from which the beach continued with many bendings and turnings till Yunoko. Not only the inhabitants of Drum Village, where we moved from Sakaimachi and where I live to this day, but also those of all fishing and farming villages in the Minamata area used to build shrines for the worship of mountain gods. What was popularly called mountain in these parts was often only a hill or an even lower elevation of the ground. The guardian, or perhaps patron gods of the mountains could manifest themselves in various shapes, for instance as old monkeys or giant snakes, but in general they were thought to look like mountain sprites. Apart from the mountain gods, the villagers paid their respects to a multifarious pantheon of major and minor local deities, to the gods of the kitchen, the kappa, the guardian deities of fishing boats, and so on. The dike of Umawari no Tomo was thought to be the ideal meeting place of these deities. The invisible, terrifying goblins Tatara no Taze from Mount Tatara and Motan no Mose from the river Motan would also meet on the dike to fight with each other, each wishing to test the prowess of its opponent. And although no one knew what these goblins really looked like, various hair-raising stories were told about them, that they came noiselessly from behind and jumped at you, frightening you out of your wits, that they liked to eat children who played on the dike until the fall of night, oblivious to the time and their parents' warning, or the small ones who cried peevishly for no other reason than that of annoying the adults. Since Tatara no Taze and Motan no Mose were of equal strength, one never knew which of them was going to win the contest. The audience, consisting of kappa, mountain sprites, and other gods, was by no means unanimous in its support for the contestant. If, for instance, Tatara no Taze showed signs of slackening his defense, the god of Mount Tatara would tuck up his sleeves and join in the fight on the side of its protege, shouting words of encouragement. The god Hachiman had long been planning to teach the arrogant god of Tatara a lesson, would seize this unexpected opportunity and step forward bellicosely, bellowing in the direction of Motan no Mose that he had nothing to fear. And thus, what had begun as a contest of strength between the two goblins finally degenerated into a fierce tug-of-war between the local gods. Grinning with malicious joy, the mountain sprites and kappa would also engage in the combat, showering blows on each other until they were full of blues and painful lumps, breaking the dish on top of each other's head, twisting each other's limb. At the time of the spring and autumn equinox, when the gods of the rivers and sea changed places with the mountain gods, those who had been disabled in the fight had to stay behind to nurse their wounds, weeping with vexation at the thought that they were missing a wonderful opportunity to improve their present wretched condition. It was said that the fight of the gods, which lasted more often than not throughout the night, reduced the wilderness of tall eulalias on the dike to an unrecognizable, tangled, sadly crumpled mass. These devastating tugs of war were always caused by ridiculous trifles, little bantering songs, inept remarks. The following song, for instance, sung one afternoon by Motan no Mose within ear reach of Tatara no Taze, while the latter was taking a nap at the foot of the dike, led to a bloody combat between the two goblins. One day, a kappa from Taze's kin was sleeping so soundly on a bank of the river. Suddenly a crab, a relative of mine, crept out of the water and caught between its pincers the sleeping fellow's phallus. Oh, what a surprise! The chap, like all of Taze's skin, was reputed for his prowess, but his penis was then as limp as a rag. The old villagers used to say that if you passed in the afternoon on the dike and, whether intentionally or not, disturbed the sleeping gods, goblins, kappa, and mountain sprites, they would get cross and punish you by making you the victim of their mischievous pranks. For instance, Kojin, the god of kitchen and the oven, who was very fond of the tiny red fruit of the oleaster, liked to take his early afternoon naps in the dark, cool shade of this tree. If a fisherman on his way home from work stopped to urinate against this tree without asking leave from the god, he would fly into a rage and cast a spell on the impudent fellow, who would wander in a daze during 3 days and nights, unable to find its way out of the labyrinth of tall reeds on the dike. When the fishermen from the neighboring villages returned from the sea, carrying their catch in nets suspended from poles, they would, if they felt the need to relieve themselves, first hem timidly to call the attention of the sleeping gods, then tap on their poles, and at last speak, thanking the latter for having assisted them in catching such a magnificent haul that day, and politely asking leave to urinate. They would also tell stories about sly foxes, which would steal up to you, unheard from behind when you passed on the dike with your catch on your shoulder. They would snatch 2 or 3 fishes from your net, replace them with old, half-rotten straw sandals or bad-smelling rags, and get away without your having noticed anything. The foxes in our parts were believed to be emissaries of the god Hachiman from the great Hachiman shrine. Convinced as I was of the divine nature of these animals, which was supposed to protect them from the vicissitudes of human passions, the sad lot of the white fox Kuzunoha, the main character of the Joruri ballad, which Okiya-sama, Matsutaro's concubine, had recited for me countless times, seemed to me both tragic and paradoxical. Forced to leave her beloved husband, Abe no Yasuna, and her son Semme, because Yasuna's sweetheart, the real Kazunoha, whose shape the fox Kazunoha assumed in order to be able to marry him, had come back, she writes on a sliding screen the famous waka, "If you love me, search for me in the Shinoda Wood of Izumi province." Resumes her true form and goes back to the Shinoda Wood, where she dies, pining for the man she loves. Whenever I listen to this ballad, which Okiya-sama always narrated with great emotion, I would lose contact with the real world and enter a magical, far more beautiful one, in which I could assume the shape of the white fox, write touching love poems, and resume my human form as many times as I wished. In the course of my wanderings on the dike, which, with its brilliantly colored reeds and flowers and population of battle-loving gods, constituted a realm that was filled with a magic as significant as that of the Shinoda Wood, I would often perceive, as I stared into the dazzling space around me, the graceful, wide shape of the fox Kuzunoha, who, in her turn, would gaze at me with such longing in her eyes that I instantly turned into a white fox's cub, which started to talk to her in the secret, love-laden language only she and I knew. I must resume my animal shape now. Oh, if I could put my sorrows into words. From within a trembling fold in the flaming sky, Okiya-sama's thick, vibrating voice reached me as if from another world. Her recitation was interspersed with the equally unreal, muffled cough of her rival, Omoka-sama. Widely apart and yet united by a common destiny which might be called perhaps human loneliness, the two women seem to have become the protagonists, the shite and waki, of an indefinitely disturbing and profound no drama, which they enacted on the dike. Without the man I love must I return unnoticed, without looking back. Pluming blush clovers and tall eulalias, as far as the eye can see. Grieve however I may, I am a fox after all. I must wake from this dream of human passion. The rays of the setting sun hurt my eyes. I will lower my hat a little. Okay, that's the text that we have today. So as you can hear, as you have seen, a quite long excerpt, and it will take us like some time and many different directions to kind of like dissect everything in here because it's very, very rich. So first of all, we'll take a look at the first question I asked on the Discord server, because I think it is quite useful to illuminate or to start talking about the text. So I'll read like the first question I wrote. The story of the Sea of Camelias was written by Ishimure between 73 and 76 after a series of books that explored closely the Minamata disease caused by Chiso Corporation. In her essay, Shinyo Kureshite, or Surviving if we translate it in English, she explained that Camellias was meant as a departure from the more somber themes and as a medicine to alleviate the pain born from focusing exclusively on the Minamata disease. In the light of the tragedy, to what extent is the start of chapter 7, so this excerpt, a therapeutic exploration of the Minamata region? So to kind of like understand and to answer this question, we need to talk a little bit about Minamata, the Minamata disease, and what was the place of like Ishimure in all of this. So the Minamata disease is part of the most lethal disease caused, environmental disease caused by pollution in Japan. It had widespread coverage in media in the 60s, and this was helped by Ishimure, who wrote a lot about it. So let's get you like a map so you can like identify where Minamata is first of all. You just want to say that you love how evocative the opening for this chapter is. Yeah, this is like very much like the general writing of Ishimure, and we'll talk about that just a little bit like after the context. So you can see like a map of Japan here, and you know that like Japan is divided in like, 4 big islands, and we are actually away from Tokyo in the on the island of Kyushu, and more precisely, the action is set in Minamata, which is this town here that is like on the sea of Yatsushirokai. And already like in the southern part of Kyushu, so away from like the better known city of the north, where you would find like most of like the tourists going, because it's just like a little bit easier. And in general, like Kyushu is kind of like seen as a very like almost naturally untapped location, kind of blessed by nature and so on. So the action is set in here, and kind of like the whole point of like this book is to talk about like Minamata, like the city, but also the region around, and especially like as you can see if we click on here. Maybe you cannot see in here because it will not like draw the border of the location, but the territory of Minamata is obviously extending like in the mountains and the forest to the southeast, and we are already talking about like this place that is in a sense like still to some extent like untouched by human activity. So to talk a little bit about the Minamata disease, this is basically a poisoning of methyl mercury. The methyl mercury was basically dumped by a corporation called the Chiso Corporation. So basically they were like doing some, light industrial things in the region of like Minamata. They had like a previous factory that like had been mentioned in the text. Let me go back to the text so you can like have this thing at the beginning of it. If you remember, here, let me start also because I can actually use my pen. We have like Chiso's old factory right here. They had like an old factory, but they built it like a new one that was making, different like products that were used for perfumery and stuff like this. And they dumped like a very toxic compound in the river and then like in the sea, right? And this is what caused like this pollution. So that happened in the mid 50s. And kind of like immediately people have seen strange things happening, like cats would die, the fish would die, or not necessarily die, but like exhibit like weird symptoms, like they would like walk very erratically in the village, in the city, as if like the animals were dazed. And then humans started to also like exhibit like those symptoms, because this is like a poisoning by mercury, right? So we are talking about like disturbance in sensory, well, in your five senses. We are talking about like ataxia, speech disturbance, hearing disorders, tremors. So damages that were like observed in the nervous system, and that could even go to like the death of individuals. And actually, like this mercury poisoning was transmitted by fish, right? The mercury was dumped in the river, then in the sea. Fish would be contaminated, and people, because as you have seen, like Minamata is a port and was a fishing port. At that time, we are talking about like 200,000 people in the region involved in fishing. They would easily like ingest a lot of this organic mercury and get poisoned. To give you like an order of a scale, people in Japan used to eat on average like 40 gram of 90 grams of fish per day in Japan overall. But in this particular region, the people working in the fishing industry, they were not like 50 grams per day. They were like on average at like 400 grams per day. So they were ingesting like a lot of these tainted and poisoned fish. And that's why like it became such a strong and difficult disease. To give you like some numbers, we are talking today of 2,200 people that have been officially diagnosed with the Minamata disease, half of them having already died. But we are suspecting that at least 10,000 more people have been contaminated by mercury. And so the Minamata disease is both like an acute and very like rapid disease, like a fulminant disease, right? Like that is causing like death quasi immediately. But you have also like a chronic type of like disease of, you have been like poisoned by mercury, and this you will keep like the sequels, the effects of like that poisoning over the course of your life. The big problem with the Minamata disease is obviously, as you can imagine, that like Chiso considered that it was not their fault. They were doing like all they could to prevent contamination, pollution, and so obviously this was not their doing, even if you had like some independent scientific studies that basically say that like they were the only one that could cause like this poisoning. And for like 1 decade, both the Chiso's corporation and the administration, the local administration and the national government were basically like ignoring the issue, saying that like, it just happened and less people seem to die nowadays. So like, it's probably like the disease doesn't exist. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And that lasted until like a second burst of the disease 10 years after, so in 1965, because like Chiso, continued like dumping mercury for like 10 years in the rivers. And that's when like people started really rioting against like what was happening. And 3 years after, in 68, Chiso decided to close like the plant altogether, meaning that like the discharge would also stop, but at the same time like mercury concentrations stayed very, very high in the Minamata Bay. And the role of like Ishimure in all of this is that like, because she saw that like government was unwilling to take action in this case, especially as like a lawsuit was prepared, she decided to document the Minamata disease. So she actually wrote first the book, and that's like the book she is the most known for, called Kugai Chodo, Waga Minamata Bio, so Pure Land, Poison Sea, Our Minamata Disease. What is my chat talking about? Mercury +2. So let me show you like also, can I show you the... should I so if I type this, will I see? No, I will not. I mean, our Minamata disease. I'm not sure I will be able to get like a cover per se. Yes, okay, it's here. I don't know if you can really see that. We'll just go here. Well, it doesn't work because I love my life. Can I go? Yeah, no, maybe not on Amazon because I will dox myself. Oh my god, we can't have like a book in like the high or cover in high resolution. What the heck? Okay. Whatever. So that was her first book, and basically in this book, she was blending documentary evidence. She was like reading like a lot of like newspapers, reports, pamphlets, clinical charts of patients, journalistic accounts. She was like interviewing patients and kind of like blending all that together, like in a narrative where you have like both like very technical and dry description of like the disease, but also very like lyrical sections talking about the beauty of the region and so on. And this book was extremely famous. That was the book that kind of like put the Minamata disease in national news. And after that, like Ishimure, because she kind of like became, the head figure of like this movement with this book, continued like to write a lot of different like books on the topic of like the Minamata disease, kind of like showcasing how it destroyed the environment, the people. So Tenno, the fish of heaven, basically talks about like the pollution in with regards to like the nature and the ecosystem, while Urumin no Miyako, City of Wanderers, was really talking about like people. But you had also Wagashimin, our dead, that was talking about like the people that died because of like the disease, and many other more books that were that are either like essays or testimonies of people involved in this like immense like thing, but also like more descriptive accounts of the region and so on. And that was kind of like the situation for, let's say, 3 or 4 years, where she really wrote like a lot of different books on this topic. And then you have Tsubaki, you have Camellias. So she wrote the book between 73 and 76, as I put in the question. And indeed, it was meant as a medicine to alleviate the pain that came from just talking about like the disease of Minamata. She felt like she needed to atone for talking like so much about it and bringing so much pain on people as they, thought back on like the disease that to some extent was still ongoing. So this is an attempt to save the region from oblivion, to not talk only about like the bad aspect of like Minamata's history, but also try to draw the beauty of the place in a narrative that would like be very far away from the consideration of the disease. And that's kind of like what you have here. So let's go back to the text now. Before we continue here, I should just mention that like, and maybe that was, I don't know to what extent it was clear from like the excerpt, but in this particular like book, we are following Michiko Ishimure as a kid. This is really like a very close or narrow book in the sense that the narrator, Michiko herself, is talking as a kid on a very like specific frame of time. Like we are talking about like a few years when she was like young. And you could have seen that in the text itself. I believe there was this mention of like babyhood in here. And also like, let me go a little bit like further. You had this idea of becoming a white fox cub. So there is this idea of her being like very, very young. And I think that's very important to understand like kind of like the dreams that are coming in here. So let's go back to the question. In the light of the tragedy, to what extent is the start of chapter 7 a therapeutic exploration of the Minamata region? So as we said, she is young, meaning that like the disease has not happened yet. We are talking in here because Ishimure was born at the end of like the 20s, in the 1920s. We are talking about her kind of like before the height of the Second World War, right? At this time, obviously Japan was militarizing itself, but we're talking about like Kyushu, so this was kind of like an idyllic and golden age place to some extent. And that is like the first indication that it's meant as like a restorative story, right? Because we are set in a Minamata of the past, a Minamata that to some extent doesn't exist anymore. And we are trying to make, through the storytelling, this place of memory come back to life. The other, obviously, thing that is quite visible, like I think in this excerpt, is how much she talks about nature and how much she talks about like beautiful things, right? The first paragraph is kind of like the exception. When she is talking about the road of Sakaimachi, you have like this section here, basically, that is talking about like, vomit or remains. You have like words that are kind of like with negative connotations: disgorged, crudity, masticating, that has like a sort of like a very physical and almost disgusting aspect to it. So there is like this section here that is talking about kind of like the more awful aspect of things. But after that, you have seen, I think, in the reading, in the recitation, that like most of the ideas, most of like the description was extremely like positive or vivid. I think especially in here, there are many other examples, but we can just take like this one here. You have this idea of radiance. You have this idea of something being luminous, flashing scales. So a world, a universe of light, and this theme of light is something that we'll find like on the rest of like the excerpt. So the portrayal of beauty is very specifically a sort of like atonement when it comes like with regards to the Minamata disease. An atonement in two different like ways. First of all, an atonement as her, the writer, for having talked about the pain, the suffering, and all the bad aspects of like the Minamata disease. And so this is her way of showing that, look, no, beauty exists. But in hindsight, it is because in this like chapter we are talking a lot about nature. This is also an atonement for the entirety of the human civilization. This chapter is an ode to nature. We're talking about like fish, about like beetles, we're talking about flowers, about trees, about how nature is breathing, how beautiful the landscape is, and how it is inhabited even by like deities and spirits and yokai. And this is her excuse, because like the Minamata disease, through like the dumping of like mercury, did not only have like effects on human bodies and human lives, but also on the environment. You had like a large decay of the ecosystem. You had like certain regions that were, by the actions of like Chiso and by the industrialization of like the town, because like when the new factory was built, it kind of like drew people away from fishing, and so they started like working in the factory. So the industrialization of like this place is seen by Ishimure as something that like that destroyed nature. And in a way, talking back about like those old days and about like how nature was when she was young is a way to apologize for, we can say, like the sins of human and human modernity. A humanity that doesn't concern itself with preserving the past, preserving nature, preserving stories and stuff. So that would be like the first aspect, I think, that is very important to notice, and that is highlighted like in this like excerpt through certain very like subtle points. Like again, like the Chiso factory, I think, is kind of like foreboding because you know that the Minamata disease has arrived, so you know through this very little mention of the factory that, oh yeah, we were talking about like a beautiful nature and so on, but at the same time you expect in the future or like in the rest of the text that we'll talk about like the decay of like this beautiful nature, like to the benefit of like modernity and like modern buildings and stuff. And I think like the first like section was very telling on that. I don't know how much it was clear from this excerpt, but we are talking about like the road of Sakaimachi, right? And in isolation, it might be a little bit weird, but you need to understand that the road of Sakaimachi was kind of like a running theme in the entire book. So we are at chapter 7. Right, so you're kind of like entering the text kind of like blind, but at this point we had talked about like the road a lot. Why? Because we are talking about the childhood of like Michiko, and you have noticed at some point that they moved, right? They moved from Sakaimachi to like the drum village. She moved from Sakaimachi to the drum village, where she lives to this day. My pen was falling to the ground. And you could understand like at the beginning in the first paragraph that she talked about the road as, and I will change color so we can like just like discuss about the road a little bit more. She talks about the road as like a voracious monster, right? We had like this idea here of like mastication, disgorged here. And I think even after we have this idea of an enormous mouth swallowing our property and stuff. And then there is this sentence of like the vision like she had of the road was influenced not only by her family with mixed feelings of bitterness and pride, but also the ignorance that landed property could be converted into money. So from here, I believe you do understand that the local administration was basically buying back the land of the Ishimure family to actually construct the road. So the road is extending on and on because it was actively constructed, but in the head of young Michiko, that she puts that like as a metaphor, with a metaphor of a monster kind of like eating the land of her family, right? That's why she is talking here about the nightmare that the road, the monster road, would one day, swallow their property, their house, and all of us. Not stop just at like some at just like some part of like the land. In the book, Michiko is also talking a lot about her parents. And there are like two key characters here in the book, like her father and her grandfather. Her mother stays at home, and this is like an entirely different thing, and I don't want to touch on that like today. But her father basically was the one telling her stories about the region, kind of like going into like travels in the countryside, like in, you know, like in the forest and stuff to show her things, while her grandfather was the more like industrious, capitalistic, peeled individual. And the grandfather was the one that sold the property to like the local administration for them to construct like this road. And there's this tension in like Michiko's head between modernity and tradition, right? Her father, through the story, is representing this pole of tradition, whereas the grandfather is representing the pole of like modernity. And that's how you need to understand like those like two different emotions, like bitterness and pride. Bitterness and pride. The bitterness is the bitterness of like the father that has, you know, lost part of his land to the prefecture. The pride is the pride of the grandfather, who is very happy to help the modernization of Japan, the modernization of like Minamata, even at the cost of his own domain. And obviously, the idea of landed property converted into money is just like Michiko saying that, like, well, she didn't know that you could sell part of your land to get like money and to help people or to give them the right to construct things on your land, since it's not yours anymore. And this entire like section, I think, like those two big paragraphs, what is very clear to me is that the presentation, like what is happening, is told with such a childlike whimsy, right? She's talking about the road as a monster, and when we explain what is happening in here, you do understand that, like, yeah, we're talking about like in adult terms, we are talking about like just the terrible thing that is happening in Japan with the basically selling of land or just like expropriation happening during the modernization of the country, be it like before the war or after. But obviously, in the eyes of like young Michiko, this is not the case. And this first paragraph is really a paragraph about like the modernity, like how modernity is swallowing nature. And that's how like, and also that's why the rest of like the paragraph is only concerned about nature. Because she refuses to walk on the road of Sakaimachi, and she prefers, as she notes in here, let me change my color, take the other narrow road or path rather, which cross the rice fields and so on. So you have like this tension between the road that is like something very modern and the path that is something completely, that is something like smaller and more, you know, narrow. And this distinction between like path and road is something that we know quite well in literature. This is not the first time it has been used, and it will certainly be not. It will certainly not be the last one. And I just want, because I think I like comparative literature, so comparing literature with itself, I want to take like another example that is kind of like similar. Maybe you know. Let me show you of a book called. Well, I'll take like the English name, so it's like easier for everyone. It's a book by Milan Kundera called Immortality. We don't need to know exactly what is happening in this book per se, but you have like several like characters that are just like doing weird things during the entirety of the book, and one of the character called Agnes decides one day, because she feels very unwell in the modern world, she decides to take her car and drive in the night, but not on like a high road, she decides to like drive on like a countryside kind of like path. And in this particular section of like the immortality, there is like a long meditation on like the difference between a road and a path. And I kind of like quote by memory, but Kundera is saying that like the road is different from the path because not only do you drive on it by car, but because she is just a line linking a point to another. The road doesn't have any meaning by itself. The only meaning for a road is derived from the points it is linking. By contrast, the path is a dedication to space. Every section of the path is inhabited by meaning and invite us to stop and look around. And you had like a French literary critic called François Ricard, who was saying that basically the road is kind of like a very linear, efficient way of traveling, whereas like the path is very this is slow. You have to walk like slowly. You will have like bends and turns and twists. It's a solitary like travel, and you are less interested in reaching the end of your travel and more about enjoying the activity of traveling itself. You don't fear the fact that like you will be stopped to talk about different things, to think and contemplate different like elements along the path. You will take your time. And this is why this section here is obviously not very interested in talking about like the road of Sakaimachi, but more so about like the narrow path that leads to the sea. And in here, in this chapter 7, we don't reach the sea per se. We don't reach the sea. This is something that will happen later in the novel, meaning that the whole point of chapter 7, that is continuing for, you know, I think like 20 more pages, is just this exploration of like the path and marveling at everything like on the way there. It is like a road is explicitly made to link places together, but a path emerges from people, animal, traveling somewhere. Kind of. It's kind of that, like, you know how you have like those sort of like quote unquote natural paths that are opening when people are walking like a lot through here. Like the path is emerging, as you say, by people walking. It's not something constructed like beforehand for you to walk in there. It's like, no, you are traveling many a times in this direction, and over the course of like several, you know, years or whatever, you will have like this path opening that is created by the exploration of the world around you and the um, um, and the contemplation of it. And again, we have seen like I was talking about like the efficient linear road versus like the twists and turns of like the path. And this is also something that you find like here very like explicitly, this old slender lonely path. And maybe I was mistaken, but I think at some point there was like a mention of it, like kind of like snaking around like the landscape. We'll find that later, mentioned later maybe. But yeah, and you can see that at this point of like the narrative, we're not exactly talking about the path, we're talking about like scenes along the way, right? She talks here about like how she was looking at like fish and aquatic life, like living in the river. And then we arrived at like a little beach that is very sheltered. And she talks about like this very picturesque idea. And I think it's very easy to imagine it in our head. Like you can imagine like this beach that is kind of like isolated and closed by rocks. And just like in the middle of it, or like on the side of like the beach, against like a cliff, you have like this shrine, this little shrine dedicated to Kanon, so Buddha Kanon, with this singular tree that is like stretching above it. And I think it has like this very like picturesque, almost like postcard feeling to it. But we don't even like spend too much time talking about it, because she looks at the sea and she starts to think about like the sea as a boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead or the spirits. And then she continues her whole exploration. And by this, by traveling the path, I think Ishimure is able to make this region alive and vivid. You can, it's no longer, a very like abstract Minamata where like a disease took place, but it becomes like a genuine place with names, with images that you can like put on those names, and that will stay with you. And I believe that's like the answer to the first question of like, why is it a therapeutic like exploration of the region, of the Minamata region? Because we are talking about the region in a concrete and very like emotion laden way. Since I live on the countryside, I have a lot of places to take a walk. If I follow the road, I know I will end up somewhere along houses or a shop, as opposed to a path into the forest that doesn't necessarily lead to anywhere. Paths are definitely more adventurous and you feel more in touch with nature. Exactly, right? Like you take the road because you need to go shop. You need to do groceries. You have somewhere to go. You need to go to school. You need to go to work, and so on. You need to go see people. As you say, like this idea of a path, you are living basically the path and nature dictating like what you will see. You can leave the objectives, the very like concrete objective of like modern life behind, to just enjoy spending time among trees, among nature and stuff. And this is really like the point of this entire like section of this entire excerpt. It's marveling at the world around us. And I think this is a good segue to like the second question that I asked. And we'll like take a closer look at like some paragraphs. So Ishimure was interested, I read my question, was interested in reviving storytelling and focused on a universe of sign to draw stories from. In this excerpt, identify how Ishimure starts her story from the smallest signs, kehai in Japanese. How are those signs used to weave a narrative, and what does that mean about her relationship with the world around her, and how is it related to the concept of like kotodama, word spirit? Let's leave the kotodama part for later if we have time, but let's talk about like the smallest signs, the kehai. This is a very, very constitutive trait of like Ishimure writing. And I think you mentioned, Ellie, kind of like how you are in touch with nature, how you look at nature around you, and how sometimes you will pick up. It's kind of the thing with like Ishimure, how you will pick up certain elements as the start of your contemplation. It's like, oh, I, walk in here and I see, if we take like this section here, she is approaching like the ditch, right, in front of the factory, and then she is noticing, I will change color as well, she's noticing like the fish. And she like, her description is stuck on like a very specific thing, on how they will swing around as she approached because they were afraid. And you have like this very evanescent moment where the layers of water are twitching here. And through that like movement of the water, she sees like a change of color that only happens when the fish are fleeing from her, right? And that's why like she had the vision of like those gates opening, because it's kind of like a mystical vision that happens here like for maybe a few seconds before like the water of the ditch is like settling again. And if you think about it, like you need to imagine the young Michiko that is like 7 years old, kind of like bending on top of the water to look at like the surface of it. And I want you to imagine, like in your head, standing like further away, maybe, 10, 15, 20 meters away, and imagining like this young girl just looking at the ditch, looking at something that, like, maybe from your perspective, you don't even see what she's looking at. And this is such like a mundane scene. But when you take like this very long paragraph, right? Like it starts at like line 15 and it ends like on the next page at line 9. So you have 2, 5, 10, we'll count that like 15. You have like 25 lines that are dedicated, maybe less, because then like she's like getting to here, like this is a different thing in here, like there's a kind of like separation in the narration, but she's at least spending like 20 lines talking about like what she was seeing like in the ditch. And this is again such a like small scene, but you can see like how it was filled with so many different ideas of it's so vivid. There's so much diversity like in this like little ditch, like it's a little like ecosystem of its own, with different like species of animals like whirligigs, whirligig beetles, roach days, big carp, different like fish that like she doesn't like mention necessarily, shrimp, loach, how they were moving, the movement like of the light of the water. So such a rich thing that is, I think, the clear definition of like what a sign is for Ishimure. A sign for her, a kehai, is something that happens around us and that has a subtle existence, meaning that you can like live your life without ever noticing kehai around you because you're focused on like other things. And again, things from the modernity, right? I need to go to school. I need to go do groceries. I need to go to the hospital. I need to go there. I need to see that. I need to do this. I need to do that. And because you're so focused on like those elements, you don't take the time to stop and look around you at those kehai. And obviously, we are talking here in a very like natural environment, right? It's like a small location on like this small and slender path that is going to the sea. But in her next novels, and especially in like Lake of Heaven, I won't talk about it really today, but in Lake of Heaven, you have this idea that like kehai are also found even like in the city. It's just that like city people have been conditioned to not look at those signs, at those kehai at all in their life, because they are too focused on like the high-paced life of industrialized, urbanized modernity, capitalism, and work. And this novel, in a way, is kind of like showing a mindset, like what type of relationship you should have with your environment, be it like in the countryside or in the city. It's paying attention to those like very little things. And that is like always Ishimure's way of like looking at the environment. I think another example, and I will read like your comment, Ellie, just after. I don't want to analyze like the afternoon thingy because we'll do that later. That will be our key thing. But which one do I want to see? I think we can read this one. It's like when she is like standing on the which she's standing like on the beach, right? Like near the little like shrine to Canon. She's like watching the sea, and the sign that like she is identifying is really like the wind, because it has been mentioned like several times, right? You have like this idea of a sea breeze with a faint wail, and here you have again like the wail of the wind blowing from the sea. You have again the wind that is bringing the salty taste of the sea. And this like idea is very specific, right? Because it's in this sentence like what we should notice. She's talking specifically about the sea breeze, so coming from the sea, that is passing through the tall pine, through the branches of the tall pine, which is what is like causing the faint wail. And that like particular breeze is like the key sign that is starting then her whole, kind of like meditation on like death, the boundary between worlds and stuff. This moment of like the mind becoming clear always stem from a very specific observation of the world around us, as if because you see something so beautiful that you are forced to pause for an instant and meditate on the meaning of like this beauty, this element. And that's like why she starts talking about like all those things. And you can see that like it takes her, and I will like highlight the text, it takes her a moment of like realization when she's like looking at the bark of the tree to get catapulted back into reality. So the Kehai, the view of the Kehai opened her mind to like another world where she felt like more in tune with the environment, with the nature around her. And that was kind of like almost a trance that lasted for a while. And we need to go back like to the idea of like Kotodama that I was mentioning a bit before in the question. Kotodama, this is word spirit, or if you want like a kind of like simplification, it's like the way sounds have or like a pathway to like the divine world. It's kind of like used like there's a sort of like divine melody in those like words in language that carries some amount of like sacredness, some kind of like holiness, and in a way, because you have like Kotodama as like Koto word, sorry, but you have also the idea of like Otodama, which is sound. Oto is sound in Japanese. And I think this is something that we find a lot in like Ishimure, is that she takes this idea of sounds and she make those sounds like a pathway to other worlds, to other realms. We don't know which one, as she says. Here, whatever the realm linked. So we don't exactly know what we are linking, but at least we're opening something in this moment of contemplation, and that's nice. Okay, going on a walk and being distracted from my thoughts to see the carefree group of ducks in the pond. It's a good way to be grabbed out of your mind and be reminded that you're part of nature and be more like the duck. It's exactly that. Like, it is exactly that. I think the whole point of like Ishimure, and you will find that a lot in her subsequent novels, is that humans are just like one component of the world that we inhabit, right? We are not more important than um, um, other animals, than plants or whatever. We are part of this world. And to a certain extent, this activity of meditation is helping us realize our place in the world and put us back where we belong, which is the world that is so bright and so complex and so rich and so diverse around us. And yeah, let's talk about the third question, because I think it's a good pathway to the third question. In the documentary Hana no Okudoe, so translated as Towards the Paradise of Flowers, and aired in 2013, Ishimure explained that the bright lights over Tokyo are not the Japan she was hoping for. And the light that you see from space, from the sky, and you're looking at like this Tokyo, this Kanto region that is completely bright, at night. And she said at the end of like this documentary, a grassy pathway to a new world will be lit up by flower lights. And it will emerge faintly like one flower, a flower or a star. That's the world I'm hoping for. A light that is a symbol of all humans' troubles. Each life, with its own light, is carrying a heavy load. Or rather, I should say that a load has been placed on each back. And each is walking on a wild pathway to a place far away in the darkness. It is not completely dark. To see this world, this new world, that is my hope. So in this like thing, you can see like for her again, like the idea of a path, right? She's like mentioning pathway twice. I think this is very important. Like this is a pathway is so something leading from one thing to another, but it doesn't have like that same direct and like efficient connotation as a road. You're like wandering through the path, and before you realize it, you have like crossed kind of like the boundary between the worlds. And also like those worlds are not exactly like cleanly separated. You have like this buffer zone where the two worlds are intertwined with each other. And that is what we will see like in this text. So let's take like a specific example, like to kind of like talk about that. I will skip again the afternoon thingy, and I want to talk about like this section here, because I want also to talk about like the storytelling part. Let me open my notes, because I took like a lot of notes and I want to not say like stupid things. What was I looking for? I'm completely lost in my own notes. I'm sorry. Give me 2 seconds. I wanted to talk about yes, about like this section. So we'll talk about like those flower lights. Okay. What is very interesting in Ishimure's literature, as I was saying, is that like the worlds are not cleanly separated; they blend into each other. And I think you have seen when we were reading like this excerpt, how it starts about like this description about like nature, and this is kind of like what we have like seen in this like first section. Like we have like seen a lot of description of like fish, insects, plants and stuff. And the later part of like the excerpt is more closely related to fantastical and mythical storytelling, right? We start, there is this moment of like transformation, we'll come back like to in a moment. But after like this like kind of like transformation of like Michiko into like a fox's cub, she starts talking about like all the spirits and the gods of like the mountain and the region. And there's a very like long enumeration of like those different things, right? And I do believe that like we have this a lot in our respective cultures, local cultures, right? Like um, in the city, I think we have like lost this idea of like storytelling for the world around us. But if you live in the countryside, if you live in like certain regions, you have like legends that are well known and that are still transmitted by some people, more often like all elder people now in our like hyper modern like societies. But you have like those tales that are kind of explaining who is inhabiting, you know, this particular river, this particular cleaning like spot. You have tales about like caves, about like paths in the mountains, about like who is inhabiting the forest, what types of animals, what relationship they have with each other. You may have like tales about like the clouds in the sky, about like how a certain light in the day will shine on, I don't know, a cliff, and like the light is a representation of like a divinity, a creature, or something like that. We all have that in our respective cultures, but more often than not, for us, like, you know, modern animals and people living in the city, if we live in a city, we have forgotten about that. And Ishimure here is kind of like making those like gods coming from, you know, the depth of the earth with a description of like the kehai, the signs. And through those signs, she will open pathways. She will create images that will allow you to see like a broader world than you were witnessing before. Not necessarily because the world is expanding like on a very like spatial sense, but more so because every little element that you will see becomes deeper, will gain like more signification. You can see mountains as like an amalgamation, well, you know, the forest mountains as an amalgamation of trees and plants. But in here, she mentioned like the mountain gods that are inhabiting those places, and she will start to give them a lot of titles and to enumerate them. We have the idea of a guardian, a patron god. You have them being like old monkey, giant snakes that you might see when you're like, you know, hiking or traveling in the mountain. Beyond that, you have like a multifarious pantheon. So a lot of different divinities, major or minor. You have the gods of the kitchen that are mentioned like a little bit after that. You have the kappa living in the river. You have the deities of the fishing boat, because obviously fishermen are creating their own myths to justify the activity and to find like some solace in the fact that someone is watching over them and they can pray to those divinities so that they can have like bountiful like catches. And the dike itself in here, that's what it's saying here. The dike itself is like the location where all those divinities are coming together, because again, like, you know, the dike is kind of like a basin, making like a basin where like water is staying, and it makes like an easy boundary that people can gather on in Japanese culture. And you have seen that like when we did our cosmology of Kyoto, we talked about that, about how those creatures of legend, those myths, are mostly located in liminal places, because this is where the world of the living and the world of the spirits are colliding. And this is the only places well, this is the most convenient places for you to be a witness of like the supernatural thingy. So again, you have like this long description of like the battle between Tatara no Taze and Motan no Moze, who are talking about like how they're fighting, but not just them. The entire pantheon of gods are coming here in this long night to battle each other and to reduce like the dike into something crumpled. I think like at some point there was like here this section here that like might have been weird when like you have heard it when I was doing the recitation, but let me do this to be able to highlight the text. I'll highlight in red. You have this idea of the dike becoming the dike becoming an unrecognizable, tangled, sadly crumpled mass, right? And I think like this is like very interesting because what are we talking about here? We're surely talking about some kind of like flood that was happening and that reduced basically like the vegetation around the dike to something like very like kind of like destroyed by the water. And to justify like what is happening, why there was like flood, then we use like this pretext, this like tale of like a fight between gods. We say that like, oh no, they had to fight for their honor, to kind of like avenge like the insults that were done like earlier in the day, earlier in the week. And in their fight, like all the water is coming on this place, on this dike, and that's what left like the site as a completely devastated like area. There is a way of justifying our reality through myth. And obviously for us, like external like observers, it might be weird. Like, why would they think that? But I think it's very easy to inscribe, especially when you are young, to inscribe like fantastical tales to explain the world around you. And obviously, we have like all those tales from the stories that people said, right? Like, I think, or maybe it's not here. It might be just below. What are we talking about? Like the parents, right here. So this big like tale, and I'll read your comment like Ellie in just a bit. Let me change this to that. The old villagers used to say that. So this whole section that like the Michiko as the narrator was talking about, like with Tatara no Taze and Motan no Moze, this is like what the old villagers were telling to kids, right? How they were warning people to not stay too long, like in the dike during the night, because you will be eaten by like all those gods and stuff, or they will prank you. And she is also by herself kind of like imagining the same thing, right? She's associating the reality around her to some fantastical like tales. And I think like what is very, very, very interesting in like in Ishimure's worldview is that she's not completely against modernity. As you can see, like she was putting some she was creating a tale for the road of Sakaimachi, the modern road of Sakaimachi, because she had to understand this road in a very specific fashion in her child head. And all the discussion about like, money and the construction of the high road, modernization and so on, like that was like too complicated for the little like Michiko. And thinking about the road as like a monster that was created like a spirit. This is basically a new spirit of the mountain that was easier for her to imagine. And in a way, she is bringing like a high and bringing like meaning into like elements of modernity, and having like a more personal relationship with those elements. So there is always this complicated stance in Ishimure where she's like, I don't like complete modernity, or like the idea of like surrendering our curiosity to modernity, but I'm not like fighting like necessarily the fact that we need to build like new roads, new houses, new buildings to live like in like a more comfortable like environment. I'm not necessarily against that, but it shouldn't be done by sacrificing our relationship to the world around us, even if this world is containing some elements of modernity. My parents were very silly pilled during my childhood, and after some time I had this whole universe of small tales of mythological-esque creatures. For example, the blue rabbit that lived under a large rock in the forest we used to take walks in, or the southern realms that were a representation of where you existed before you were born. I've never thought about it more seriously, but I'm quite thankful for having some element of mystique in the world from my childhood. Exactly. I think like, and again, there might be in those like tales that you were talking about, like it is it is in here in this particular context a shared experience, right? Because it comes from your parents, it comes from them sharing like stories with you and like sharing those stories with us also in this chat. But this is also something that you can keep for yourself, and what like Michiko Ishimure is doing like in this like first 2 paragraphs when she's talking about like Sakaimachi. And I think, yes, it makes sense for Ellie, right? Because she is in touch, I think, with those signs. And that is like the whole point of like Ishimure's literature, is to make us aware of like the untapped potential of the signs of the world around us, and how it can be like full of meaning. Maybe we'll share the same tales, if we live and we talk about like the same region, or maybe we have different interpretation for the same the same tree, the same like building, the same like dam that has been constructed. On the topic of like creating like a deity in a lake of heaven, so this is the story, like you remember, like I talked about that, the story of a village that has been swallowed by a lake when like a dam was constructed. And in Lake of Heaven, uh, Ishimure is talking about like the dam as like a new spirit, that like there's like the spirit of the river, the dragon of the river that was always like inhabiting the river in the past. But now a new spirit has been created, the spirit of the dam, and the two fought together, and that's how like the lake appeared and swallowed like the village. So ascribing meaning and mythology to the world around us, it's actually like engaging with it and kind of like seeing that we are part of it. We are not better than it, because they are probably like gods and spirits and so on that we don't see like in our everyday life, but they are accessible to our minds if we take time to meditate a little bit. And in Ishimure's literature, because we are still walking on this like road that leads like to the dike, that leads like to the sea, traveling further and further along the road is kind of like forcing us to interact with it. It's like the same feeling of you walking, I would say, like on a beach, and towards like the sea. And at some point you realize that, oh, at first like the sea was just reaching your I don't know, ankles, and now like it's reaching your knees and stuff, and you realize that like you're deep into like a new universe. In here it's like a psychological universe where gods can exist like alongside humans. And you have this moment again of like trance, because like when we talked about like kotodama, the word spirit, those like this type of like speech is used in like incantations and trance recitations, and sacred oaths that are shared by gods. And being attuned to like those sounds, those words, it's allowing you to as she says here, say goodbye to the baffling world of humans and kind of like getting into something new without you realizing. So yeah, and obviously there is like a very interesting thing here, and Ellie kind of like touched on the subject just before, but we are not talking about like deities that are well known here, right? Obviously we had a mention of like Inari at some point, whatever. Inari is obviously well known, but as all religion around like the world, and especially like polytheistic like religions or animistic religions, um, everything is changed by the local context. Like, and even in Christianity, to be fair, like the Mary is not the same. Like in a small, I don't know, in like a city in Western Europe, in Italy, this is not the same Mary as like the Mary that is like that has been worshipped as like a sort of like figure that took on like local also rituals in Peru, for example, because we know historically, like those during like the colonization of like America, obviously like conquistadores came with their own culture, their own like Christian culture, but they had to contend with like the local culture. And obviously there were clashes, but more often than not there were like areas and zones of interaction, of hybridation, and you have like elements of faith, of different faith, that were like brought together in like new meaning. And you can see that it's the same thing here with like the tale of like the fox being like very specific to this region, because it's linked to like some poetry that has been recited by locals for a very long time. When we talk about the goblin Tatara no Taze and Mota no Mose, those are very specific like goblins that do not exist anywhere else, because they are linked to, as you can see from the name, right? It's like Taze from, no is like the possessive, right? This is Taze from the Mount Tatara. It's Mose from the Motan River. So those goblins only exist in here, and you will not find else those like spirits anywhere else. And I think there is something like very interesting in opening your minds to like a religion or beliefs that are effectively like foreign to you. There is no way, if you do not live like in this region, that you could have heard or lived through this like specific set of beliefs. And there is a moment of mental effort, an open-mindedness that you need to learn to be able to get into this like very strange and vivid world that probably like a lot of people in this region are seeing, but especially like Michiko here. And but on the topic of like this being like something seen by a lot of body, remember you had like this section about like the fishermen that were asking the local gods if they could uh, urinate against a tree or just like thank them like for their catch. So everybody is steeped into like this world of like science, this world of like divine or mythological meaning, and that's seeping into their own like personal life, work and stuff. I do genuinely think that mythology is important, especially in modern times. It could be a way to convey important ideas without having to be overly academical. In my experience, people I've talked to aren't always as interested or engaged in the scientific details, and imaginary stories and tales can bridge that gap as long as it's clear what's real and what's not. I mean, exactly, right? Like, I think nobody to like it's very different from like I think believing and engaging with like those stories, even like in a very like deep and serious manner, and then saying like yes to the question like, do those like spirits exist like for real? Like in reality, you can touch them; they're tangible. I think most people will tell you that like, yeah, surely you cannot like see them, even in like stories, right? Like I think it was mentioned at some point, but like those goblins, they're invisible. It was like a little bit like above, I think, right? The invisible. My thing is like falling again. That's problematic. Um, the invisible, terrifying goblins of Tatara no Taze and so on. So there's a justification of like why you could not like why you will not be able to see them, but that's not the point. As you say, the point is that like there's a lesson here. There's the goal is not for you to see them, it's for you to find some meaning in the world around you. And I do think that like mythology is an important thing, be it like mythology through mythological creatures or mythology in a more like um, allegorical sense. Yeah, like you can like ascribe this like mythological energy to like a lot of things, and it's kind of like what Roland Barthes was doing in his book like mythologies. He was taking like mundane things like certain brands of whitener, certain like brands of cars and stuff, and how there is a mythology around like those things. I think that like when you think about Ferrari, Porsche, and so on, you from like the ads you have seen on TV and stuff, like there is a mythology that has been created around them, trying to give like meaning to like those brands so that like you would feel compelled to like revere them or buy like those cars. Everything is, I think, open to interpretation, open to receive like more meaning than it has like in existence. And the people that are like putting like that are creating those mythologies, I think it's all of us. We can decide like what meaning we want to give like to certain things. If we talk about again like very modern things, I think Tesla is a good example. How Tesla as an electrical car company was seen initially as like something, a representation of the future. So it gets this mythology of advance, of progress, of the modern man. A pathway to the future, and then there's the whole Elon Musk thing and the mythology of like Tesla through our work, right? The way we were engaging with the brand, it kind of like changed into something like cursed, and Tesla was something to be mocked, especially as we saw like a lot of incident happening with them. And so mythologies are a very cooperative aspect. Um, I don't. I believe that like you can create your own mythology, but when we talk about mythologies, they are mostly like shared experience of the world around us, and that is making things more personal. I think more believable, more understandable, as you say, because academic talk is maybe too difficult. And that's kind of like what is happening in here with like Ishimure. She talks a lot about like environmental, preservation and stuff. But we don't need to do that necessarily from a pure scientific like standpoint in her literature, because it's not the point. Of course, you can read like articles about like the concentration of like mercury, the concentration of like a lot of like pollutants in the water, in the soil and stuff. But that's very like difficult for people to understand. But if you transform that story into like, yes, the gods and the spirits of like those places have like fled for another place because they were chased by, I don't know, pollution that you can ascribe like a sort of like spirit to. Then you can justify like the decay of the land, and people will understand what is happening in like a very vivid way. And again, the point of like um, a, m- a mythology is to help people look at kehai, at signs. It's to open their eyes to the world around them. But then I think most people are smart enough to notice changes in the world around them. Like nobody, like certain people don't exactly know about the in and outs of like climate change, how it's really happening, what are the mechanism at play here. Nobody like would be able, like very few people would be able to hold like a 20-minute conversation on the acidification of the oceans if they are prompted like on the spot. But I think that like when attuned to like those signs, those like AI, everybody in the world around us is able to see the changes that had happened in the last years. For example, like how the summers are hotter, how like the grass is year after year less green than before, how I don't know, blossoms in the spring are blossoming earlier and earlier every year, how this place that was like full of water and full of life had become like more quiet in a very like, again, disquieting way, because the spirits, the animals, everything, they have left. And to be able like to be attuned to like those changes, those little signs, yes, mythology is very important because it makes you care for the world around you, and that's like the whole point of like of Ishimure, I think. The brand recognition of Coca-Cola brand isn't tangible, but it's very much real. Yeah, there's a mythology about Coca-Cola, right? Like the fact that it's also linked to like Christmas with like all these Santa Claus adverts that we are seeing. Mythology is everywhere and is like leveraged by everybody. Like the point of like advertising companies is to create mythologies for you to latch on easily. You don't buy a car like most people do not buy a car for like very specific um, technical like reasons. They're also swayed by brands, and I think we are all swayed by brands and by mythologies. It will like change the way you're like approaching things. I know that I'm lenient with like some things because I do connect with their mythologies, and other things I do not care about. If we talk about our lived environment, I know that some people around me have put like some mythology around like the city as a breathing thing, its own mythology, its own like existence. And I personally do not have like this same like ecstatic view of like the city mythology. So I don't connect with it like as much as I connect with like more natural environment, for example. And I think that comes to like the upbringing that we had, the stories that we heard, and the books that we read, the films that we watched. They're opening like doors for on the world around us, and I think that's like essential today because um, storytelling, I think, is an art that is kind of like disappearing when it comes like to our lived environment. So pathways, this is kind of like the point of like um, Ishimure, finding little areas, boundaries that we can easily cross through meditation, um, and that will help us like see more of the world around us. And give me 2 seconds because again I have like the nib of my pen that just fell somewhere and I don't know where. Okay, I'm back. And I think we can talk about the last aspect of the last question I put like in the excerpt, and it will probably like stop our exploration on that like closer analysis of the text, I was anti-escapism forms of escapism are the best. That's crazy, but you are not wrong. So I was like asking to read closely this particular passage. That starts like in the afternoon, and stops at how shall I return to my former shape again. And I want us to take like those like, if 20, 25 lines or whatever, and do like a closer stylistic analysis of this section to show you how, because we had like a very like high, I think, scale analysis, kind of like talking about like broad ideas. But now I want to show you how we can also analyze language to leverage like a very interesting line of reasoning. So my question here was, or the hint I gave was, analyze the style by paying attention to the enumeration of elements and identify the two focal points of the stream of consciousness. What was Ishimure's intent in this paragraph? So stream of consciousness, obviously, I think it was like pretty clear since we are like in the perspective of like young Michiko and she's literally just walking the road and telling us like what she is seeing here. So this is really much like in the style of like what we call I novel or novel of the first person from like the internal psychology of like people. And we need to like search for the two focal points. So I'll read again like this section so we can like get back into the mood. In the afternoon, these grasses sparkled in rich golden brown tones. Their continuous growth was interrupted here and there by thickets of oleasters whose tiny vermilion fruits gleamed like pearls. At their roots bloomed an extravagance of Bluesky and chrysanthemum, which glowed in the deepening sunset with such incomparable beauty that the whole dike, already saturated with the radiance of autumn, seemed to have turned into a horizontal, trembling rainbow, which grew paler at one end until it merged into the sea. In that magical instant, it wasn't difficult, it seemed to me, to become a white fox's cub. All I had to do was bend my hands inwards in imitation of the latter's forepaws and cry, "Con, con," and the metamorphosis would occur. I tilted my head and listened intently. The rustle of the waving Camellias mingled in infinitely sweet, cool harmony with the lap of the gentle waves of the sea breaking against the dike. "Con, con, con," I cried again, and squatted down among the golden-tinted wild chrysanthemums, which gave off a pleasant scent. I had often heard marvelous stories from the old woman in town about foxes' weddings when splendid processions passed at night on the dike, illuminating their way with lanterns. Plucking some flowers, I tore off their petals and sprinkled them over my head, just like the cubs accompanying the wedding procession. Shall I become one of them or not? And if I become one, how shall I return to my former shape again? Okay, so let's try to kind of like, first of all, divide this section into different parts, into different like thematic parts, which is like kind of like the first thing you do in a close reading analysis. So in my opinion, the first act of like this paragraph, the first like period of this paragraph, all roads lead to T. This is absolutely crazy. The first act of this paragraph is the description of the vegetation that ends with like the way like there's a movement from like the plants towards like the water of the dike, and it kind of end in here. So that would be our section number one. Our section number 2 is this talk about like becoming a white fox's cub. You have the narrator saying that like she just has to bend her hands so look like a fox, and she would just like become one by like making some similar like sounds, right? And so there is like this whole moment of her kind of like playing this transformation here, right? Like making like the con of like a fox. This is, I think, the second period of like this particular excerpt, and then the rest is kind of like an explanation of like why, kind of like a realization of like what she was doing, and a question, like the last two questions are questions about like what can she really become like a spirit of the forest, and if so, can she really like transform back into herself? So very open question, kind of like more existential question uh, about herself. And that would be the third and last period of the the excerpt. Yeah, we'll talk about like the merging just a little bit after. Like you notice like the merging with like the sea, and I think like this is like there's a sense of motion, right? Obviously there's a sense of motion because we're talking about like the road and the path, and the path is something that you need to walk, so there's always like a movement in Ishimure's literature, and this is not only the movement of like the characters but also the movement of the world that is rotating and moving around us. Okay, so now that we have like identified those like three different like periods, what we do in France normally is kind of like read literally sentence by sentence and kind of like identify interesting like things we can latch on. It can be words that are repeated, that can be like figures of like speech, stylistic like figures, it can be like lexical repetition and stuff. We basically highlight everything that feels like useful, that would probably at some point like make the analysis come together. So we said like obviously that the first section was about like plants and nature very closely, and I think like a good thing would be to highlight those mentions of natures. So we have obviously the oleasters that are mentioned here. We have obviously the grasses. We have named like flowers, right? The spirias, the chrysanthemum. We had fruits like those like nondescript, like I mean the oleaster fruits that are mentioned here. And then you have like kind of like after diet, let's say the dike as like uh, visible like natural thing, right, of like water kind of like pooling near or inside like the dike. Another thing in here that is very important in my opinion is like the play on colors. We are talking about like lush colors, of bright colors. We have like rich, oops, this color is like impossible to see, the yellow. Let me put like in blue. We have rich golden brown tones, vermilion. It gleamed, so it was shining. Extravagance as like something that is alluded to rich. The deepening sunset, so you have this idea of like a bright orange, yellow, red color. You have this idea of radiance, so it's shining, but of rainbow, obviously. So you have like a sort of iridescence of like the light on the surface of like the water, and then you still have like the paler end of like that dike, so further along the path when it eventually merged into the sea. And we don't know from this section, we don't exactly know if like she can really see the sea, or if it's just like her imagination of like, oh, she sees that like the dike is getting paler and she imagines that like it will at some point like merge into the sea. I think because we're in such like a dreamy stream of consciousness, it's not completely clear. So the tone, I think, of like this first section, like immediately, it's like a sense of, oh, right. I think it's obvious that like she stopped in the afternoon. You can imagine like the setting sun, the sunset was mentioned, and this is really bringing her a kind of like solemn, rich, impressive like atmosphere that is forcing her to, yeah, stop and look at things, look at all those plants, grasses, oleasters, fruits, spirea, chrysanthemum, and so on. And also like the description of like the flowers is not finishing, right? You have the Eulalias here. We see the wild chrysanthemum again, and so on. Okay. A very interesting thing also that like you can feel, it was obviously felt in Michiko's literature. I mean, you probably have felt it like a little bit before, but I think it's very clear in this particular paragraph, is that like her stream of consciousness is kind of like a Proustian style of writing. So very long sentences that are swelling. You see a lot of like different propositions and commas that are separating the different like parts of like the sentences. And the big sentence in here obviously is this one. I'll just like note the start of the sentence. It starts in here, right? And it stops. I can even like highlight the entire thing. You have like this section. This is like one sentence, right? You can see that it's like what, like 5 lines. It's probably, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You can say it's like probably like 70, 60 or 70 words. So we are a very long sentence, and you can see how the sentence is like swelling a little bit, going from one thing to the others, and kind of like bringing you like as like a movement. Your focus on like something different every time, like there's a comma. I will highlight also the comma in here. Again, my nib is falling. What the heck? I need to buy like another like stylus for like my tablet. This is like, this starts to be a little bit comical. Let me move that so I can like have this without it like falling on the floor literally like every time. A Proustian style of writing, a Proustian style of writing. Let me write that here. We're talking about like, about Marcel Proust. So this is like, in search of, why is this stylus like so broken? It will like, in search of lost time. And I need to do this because it's the title of something. So Proust was known like for those like very swelling sentence that were, they were like swelling, and then they were kind of like emptying, like hollowing a little bit, and you had like this sense of like, oh, it's like the ebb and flow, you know, of the sea, of the tide. So in here you can feel like this swelling with like those comma that are like helping. What the heck? Can you stop doing that? Do I have to flatten? I cannot flatten you per se. I can lock you. Or not. What the heck? Can I just like annotate like things without you being what if I flatten you? Yes. I'm flattening you, it doesn't matter. Whatever. I don't care about like, the license key. I'm not saving like this. So you have like this description, right, about like the roots, and you have like the plants, the spirea, the chrysanthemum, and then you have this comma that is like swelling, making the sentence swell and go to something else. And this something else is like you look up to the sunset and you look at the light that is like falling into the dike. So there is like a movement of swelling here, even if there's not a comma, where we go from the sunset to the dike with like this that serves as a connector. The dike already saturated, or even like, to be fair, which glowed in the deepening sunset with such an incomparable beauty that the whole dike, no, okay, so this is here, that the whole dike, already saturated with the radiance of the autumn, seemed to have turned into a horizontal trembling rainbow, pause and the last swelling, which grew paler at one end until it merged into the sea. And you can feel like key ideas, like every time we have like a swelling, we're going to like a different element of the description, and your gaze is kind of like forced to like travel with a description as if you were like the narrator herself, as she's like guiding your attention to the different elements that she is seeing. And I believe to some extent that's what we find in here too. Kind of like it's a little bit unclear. Let's say like that enumeration. And so what's the point of like that enumeration, that like succession of like elements, of similar elements that are here to guide your attention? In my opinion, like the goal of that is to make you merge with the environment, to set like a scene where you can become like the narrator. You can feel in your head like the setting of like this die kind of like coalescing through like those elements. And then when this is done, you achieve like this magical instant. And that's when a door is opening. And that's like the second focal point. So that was the first focal point of the stream of consciousness. That was the description of the dike. That was the description of nature. And the second focal point is this second section, the moment where she steeped into like a new world, and she is allowing herself to be transformed into something else. This is both like a result of the environment around her and her own imagination, like as a young girl. The emotional whiplash of seeing so many bit-worthy words being mentioned. So in here, you have like this imitation, obviously, very like physical imitation of bending the hands. Who is calling me at that time? Nobody. Bending the hands inwards in imitation of the letters for pose and cry con con. So the cry of like a fox. And the metamorphosis would occur. She just has to do that. And then I think there is like a little like mention that we need to do here about, and we'll say that like in yellow, the rustle of the waving Eulalias. If you remember how we read the text, you might remember like the end section of the excerpt. That was here, where you have like the tale of Okiya-sama and Omoka-sama. Those characters were mentioned like before in the novel. We won't talk about them, nor like the no drama, because we don't have time today. But in the poem, in the no drama that they were enacting on the dike together, you have this tale of like, you know, the fox that had to leave because like the person she was imitating, that she was like she took like the form of, came back, and so she had to leave unnoticed without looking back. This is like the line 16. Blooming bush clover and tall dahlias as far as the eye can see. And this is basically this section here, the last sight, the last elements that she saw from like the world she was inhabiting with her lover before she has to leave for her wood again. And to some extent, this whole description here, especially with the rays of the setting sun that are hurting her eyes, you can see that we find all those elements like before in the description. We talked about like the deepening sunset, right, in here. And we're talking about the Eulalias. So what is really creating this metamorphosis in this passage, and we know that from like the broader context of like the text, is the storytelling, the stories that she heard from the old ladies in her village, in Drum Village. So when she was traveling the road and she saw like that sight of the dike, the sunset, the plants, the Eulalias, she was instinctively reminded of like those old stories, and that's how she felt she could blooming blush clovers. Blush clovers are quite funny too. But that's how she felt like she could transform into a white fox. That is something allowed by the stories she has heard. And obviously at this moment in the text, you do not know about like those stories per se. You didn't have like that section, that little like no drama recitation in here. So it might seem for you as the reader still a bit weird that like a young kid was thinking of like transforming into a cub. But in fact, this is steeped into the mythology of that place. And I think like a very interesting thing also in here is how the description is like kind of like stretching. Like the previous section was very tight, right? You have very like tight elements described, very specific flowers. And in here, this sentence, I think, has the same swelling and kind of like exploration of the contrast in scale between the plants that are like growing near the dike, and here the gentle waves of the sea. So your gaze is again stretched towards the horizon, but this time this is with like this sense of like melancholia and nostalgia of her becoming a fox and being like attuned to the story of what's the name of the fox already? Of Kuzunoha, that had to leave, right? And there's like this almost, you know, pathetic feeling to the text with a con repeated, and I cried again. She cried. She was not obviously like you a fox is crying, right? But I think also this is crying in relationship to like the story of the fox that had to leave. And there is like a sort of fantasy, right? Because later on in the text we mention in here that the fox the fox died in the forest. She resumes her true form and goes back to the wood where she dies, pining for the man she loves. And I believe that like the third section is kind of like a fantasy. This is a fantasy in a fantasy. She's already like, dreaming of becoming a fox. And there's a dream in a dream of like this fox wedding, or perhaps the wedding of like Kuzonoha with her lover. And she is part of like this procession. They're all experiencing this world of happiness that did not exactly happen in the tale. And obviously, there is like this moment here where she is plucking some flowers, and you need to understand that she was plucking some flowers in real life. And she tore the petals and she sprinkled them in real life over her head. But at that moment, she really thought that she was just a cub in this wedding procession. And you have like a daze. She is in a daze. And the question, like, should I become one of them or not? The answer is that, like, it doesn't really matter, because in her head she had already become one. And if I become one, how shall I return to my former shape again? This is, of course, a reference like to the no play from after, when like we mentioned like the foxes that were able to change shape to like fall in love with like humans, but in this section it doesn't really matter for her, because we know that is the power of her imagination, and she can like become a fox or not whenever she wants to. She is lamenting because she is putting herself in like the pose, I guess, of Kusuroha, of the fox, and she feels like her pain by proxy, uh, while like living on this living like this scene near the dike. So we mentioned like earlier how the world, like the real world, the real landscape is always merging with like fantastical, mythical creatures and just atmosphere. In Ishimure's storytelling and narration, and I think you have like a good example here. You have this description that is starting with like a first focal point on the nature, on the flowers, on the water, on the colors, and then the spirit and the mind of like the soul of like Michiko cannot help but think, because it wasn't difficult to think that way, to think back of the stories. She is like brought to this like mythological world where she can like become part of it, um, and be one with like the spirits around her, and it's kind of like um, a throwback to what she was like saying before. We are talking about saying goodbye to the baffling world of humans. In this instance, she has left the human world and entered one of spirits. Or you can like see that even like in a broader sense, and consider that like at this point, because it happened like earlier in the text, right? Uh, Perhaps she had already left, even if she was catapulted back into reality, perhaps she already has left the world of humans when she first stepped into this narrow path that was crossing the rice field. Perhaps she is already in the world of the spirits, and probably that, or maybe she is already like a fox at this moment. Obviously, for an external observer, it's easy to say that like she has not become a fox, because you would see her just like walking and like looking at the dike, at the the flowers, and doing like this playing, doing this like play pretend of being a fox by making like sounds, by crying like foxes. But because we are in an I novel, because this is a stream of consciousness, this potential external observer do not matter. We are becoming foxes the same way she is becoming one in the story. There is like this connection through the stream of consciousness of empathy, and we're invited with her in this world. Is it that hard? Is it difficult for us readers of like this paragraph to imagine this real character, the young Michiko, plucking some flowers and tearing the petal to like sprinkle head over her head? Is it difficult for us to imagine that? If it's not, then it shouldn't be difficult for us to also imagine at the same time the procession, that the wedding procession that is passing like in near the dike. And I think that's like the power of uh, Ishimure, because she knows that like she is telling a story to us. She can blend the quote unquote real elements with the mythological elements of the region into a coherent narrative. And as the reader, you will take that in a very natural way. It doesn't feel like, reality has blended with like fiction, because you are reading like a fiction per se, you are reading a novel per se. So your sense of like realism, of like coherence, was already weakened by the nature of the text itself. And anyway, this has been prepared in this chapter 7 by the succession of stories, of signs that are like opening your mind to like a different reality. We are not in here, we are not Japanese people. We do not live in Kyushu, we do not live in the Minamata of Michiko's childhood. So we don't know this place in particular, but she is offering her view of like this space, and you have to take it as is. It's not reality, but it doesn't matter, because it's what she experienced. It's like the way she was representing the space to herself. Ishimure trusts the reader. You might say that like in almost like a cheeky way, but it's exactly that. He trusts you to be able to pick up the signs and to be able to open your mind enough to trust that like she was really thinking that when she was like plucking those flowers and traveling on this dike. And this is like a very, I think, important trait of storytelling. It's really like trusting that you have the sensitivity to the world around you, that you're still sensitive, that you're still human enough, and perhaps like, human enough to be able to commune with the nature, with this type of like storytelling. I think like there is a very interesting thing that like Ishimure is saying in her later years, in her more recent interviews, like before she died in 2019. She said that like as much as she was like writing stories, and after the Camellias, she was writing more stories like that about like signs and the poetry of nature and so on, and less about like her early books on more like clinical accounts of the Minamata disease. She was saying at the end that like the power of her stories were frankly quite minimal, right? She wasn't thinking that like her books could really change society, considering like all the things that were happening in the world, in Japan, the social, political, economical crisis. But you really put that in a good way. Like she trusted that, and she had faith that she needed to tell and to continue to tell like stories. Um, what if we continue to share our own stories about the world that we live? I have grown in a different city than all the people in here, and I have like stories about like how I wandered, in the streets, and some elements near me were filled of like mythology. I can talk about like this tree that still today, as an adult, I go to and I talk to as a friend, as like the keeper of my secrets. Like all my secrets are etched into the bark of like this tree, not physically, but like almost like mythically, by all the things I've told over the years to this tree. And it has become like a very tangible part of my mythological world and world experience. Um, we continue to tell the story and to dream because those stories, they're always endangered, always elusive. They can die with you, you know, very quickly after you pass away. So we trust that telling those stories will keep the flame alive. And that was kind of like what she was saying in her interview, like the third question I asked in the Discord server, the quote. She was saying that like each life with its own light is carrying a load, or should I say a load has been placed on their back, and each is walking on a wild pathway to a place far away in the darkness. The place far away in the darkness is the future, right? We're all walking towards the future and we don't know what is there. But perhaps it is not completely dark because we carry with us the light, and you see people walking in front of you with a light, their stories, their experience of the past and the present, and how it will illuminate the future. Ishimure is not against modernity per se. She is against the loss of sensitivity that we have for our legacy, for the world around us, and for this whimsical approach of the world. In a way, that's why in this like small excerpt that we were studying, the young Michiko was asking, how will I return to my former shape again? Because her point was never to transform forever as a fox and live as a fox in the forest and abandon her world, her parents, her father, her grandfather, all the people around her. No, it was to experience this connection with nature, this connection that feels very unique. What she says after when she talks to Kuzunoha, she talks in, you can see here, in the secret love-laden language. What the? Only she and I knew. This is a communion with nature. This is a moment of preciousness, a moment of introspection, even. But introspection by looking at the world around you. What is, I think, important is that, like, she will come back to the world. She will grow up. She will be with her family again. So there's not a complete refusal of like modernity and of everything that happened, with her family, with the whole road that was constructing, like, and this is basically what the rest of the book is saying. This is really a book about like human connections. We talked about a lot of characters in this region of like Minamata, and sometimes in like very harsh ways, because we have like people becoming mad. For example, at the end of like the text, this is not something that you can like know without having the entire like book, but you have this mention of like Omoka-sama. Omoka-sama is actually getting falling into madness. She's losing her mind in the course of like the novel, and um, telling the story of like Omoka-sama and Okiya-sama is a way to bring them again into the world, to not forget about them, to keep everything in deep in her memory, and carry this legacy with her, like as a young Michiko and then as an adult Michiko. And I think this is really also the experience of, as you can see here, human loneliness. I think in a way we're all lonely, and we are seeking the lights of other people. We are trying to find meaning in shared mythology, in shared connection, in shared stories. And this is why Ishimure was writing this book, because Minamata is not just the disease, it's not just like statistics of, 1,000 people dying from the accursed policies and pollution of Chiso's corporation. Minamata is today is also like a city full of people that had their own life, their own issues, and their own outlook on life. And if you took Minamata today, it's a city that is trying to go past this event, to go past the Minamata disease. It's today considered like one of the prime eco-cities in Japan, at the forefront of like environment protection in Kyushu. And the city is trying to create a new mythology. And perhaps by becoming an eco-city, they are tapping into what Ishimure was trying to do, which is bringing the past into the present and sending that into the future, so that like people will remember that Minamata is a wonderful place. So yeah, it's a therapy, it's a hope, it's a light, it's a flower, it's a star. It's the belief and the trust that we are still attuned to the world around us, and that the new generations, and that is really like what is being said also in her next books, especially like Lake of Heaven, the one carrying the torch and carrying like the stories and so on in the future is not the elders. It is the new generation that is allowing itself to be in touch with those mythologies, even if they feel foreign and a little bit weird. We need to be attuned to the sign around us, because if we don't, then what's the point of trying to protect the world we are living in? Okay, I'm reading now comments because I'm basically done with analysis here. What if we look beside the illusory road and perceive the myriad paths that we build together like constellation in a moonless night? Exactly. I think it's completely that. The idea of a path is, again, that like the path will guide you, but there are like many paths, and people can take like different paths because your gaze will be like attracted by different things. So maybe like here Michiko is going to the dike, but maybe like someone else would have taken like a completely different path, and they would have like a completely different reading on the mythology, the natural mythology of that place. So in a way, she is implying that there is a way for those who have lost that ability to come back to nature and humanity and embrace mythology because they are human. Exactly. she is saying that like if you live in a city, most probably you have lost your touch with like the human world. And this is really the point of like Lake of Heaven. Lake of Heaven is really one of my favorite books of all time, because it's the story of like a young let's say young adult that is coming to the hometown of his grandfather to throw his ashes in the lake that has swallowed the village, right? And he will stay here for basically the entire, like the months of like August, and he would talk with people and he will listen to like the stories. He will attend like the wake for like the young priestess of the village, and he is like, he comes from Tokyo and he realizes that he's spending like, by after a few weeks, that he started to spend more time looking at things that he never looked at before. He never looked at like plants, at like flowers and stuff. And the story ends with him, because he's a musician, finally getting the inspiration anew for like his own music, because he wanted to compose something like for the koto, the instrument. And he decides at the end, and you don't see that the novel is kind of ending on that. It ends with him choosing like the story of like the stories plural of Amazoko as like the material for his new song. And he says that maybe he will never like truly understand what it meant to live in Amazoko, in the old village that is now swallowed by the water, but he felt something like so tender that it didn't matter, and he wants to like commune with Amazoko through song and storytelling and tell the story of like this region like to other people. So there's this return to nature and this reconnection with like the signs and with like sensitivity. And what is very interesting is that like Masuhiro, so the character, is coming like to this like village, but at the end he's going back to Tokyo. So like this whole trip was kind of like a parenthesis, and that's the way of showing, the way for like Ishimure to say that like we're not. It's not like, oh, he settles in the village like forever, but no, it was useful for him to open his eyes, but like no, with his open eyes he can go back to the city and look at the signs there and maybe try to change Tokyo for the better. It is interesting to me that this specific topic has been resurfacing in my life recently. Maybe it's confirmation bias, but ever since I've started replaying, I don't even know what you're referring to. I've noticed my sense of for this light people share had been rekindled. I think it's like we are at a time with like capitalism, right? Where for the past, for our generation, we have known crisis and crisis and crisis and nothing more. And I think we need like this reconnection to the world around us. And looking at those signs, looking at nature, especially at the time where we talk about like climate change, I think it gives us hope, and it's helpful for us to find like meaning in life, in all the crises that we're experiencing. So I'm not surprised that like a lot of people of finding that like I made like a video on fishing. And lately, like if you have been like on Steam, whatever, you everybody is talking about like fishing games. It becomes the new trend again, and I think it's literally what I was talking about in the video. It's like a pathway, sorry, to interact with your environment, even with a game first before like going outside. And this craze for like fishing games, I think, comes from like the fact that we need this connection to the light, and to something, a flower, a star, something else, that is making us alive. Megaman Sarforce, okay. It's inspiring that some places around the world are more in tune with mythology. In Sweden, we have lost most of our cultural ancestry because of the Protestant church centuries ago, and also some nationalist tendencies a while back, somewhat current as well. Thankfully, there are some places here that try to embrace a symbiotic relationship with nature through communal agriculture arrangements and more public spending towards cultural exchange events and education of the local flora. as you can say, this is a political like issue. Obviously, like there are beliefs issue, right? Like Philippe Descola talked about the form of the visible, and talked about like the different type of like religions, basically, and how certain religions are steeped into animism, which is like a bit more conducive to this idea of like spirits, mythology, like inhabiting the land. But again, every country has this, and it really comes to, as you say, like political preservation and stuff. And that's why like Ishimure was also like involved into like those cultural like events. She was like a very prolific writer, and she was like doing a lot for the cultural survival of Minamata. Like she says in her essay, Surviving, that the point of like her book was to prevent Minamata to fall into oblivion after like this the Minamata disease. And I think that like nowadays it's especially important, as you say, to like spend towards like to help like people connect with nature through those like exchange events, cultural like events, museum and stuff. And that is like an entire like part of like ecological considerations, right? When we're protecting the environment, I think we're not only protecting like plants and the earth around us, but also I'm getting spammed. It's crazy. But I'm also like I also think that it's protecting like the stories that we have here and the identities in here, and also like embracing like diversity, right? The problem of nationalism, obviously, is that it tries to strain it tries to, what am I saying? To, well, give only one interpretation for the world around us. You have to follow like the kind of like representation that like the state makes of itself and of its like environment. And this is a very like imperialist project, obviously, and almost like a fascist project. The whole point of like a mythology, compared to like a very like a story that is like set in stone, is that the mythology is like fluid. You have shared mythologies, as we saw like in this excerpt, but also like more individual mythologies, and all of them can coexist together. And I think to embrace this diversity, it's like an essentially like anti-nationalist approach, because you want to share that to others, you want to invite others to get a glimpse of like your inner world. And there are obviously like as you said, programs that are trying to fulfill this like cultural preservation like role, and especially, I mean, I've done like a lot of research on that, but like villages that have completely disappeared in Japan, and some people are trying to make the memory of like those villages, those places, come back from the earth or from like below the water. And I think like our political like action should always be rooted into this understanding of like the world we inhabit. It's nice to have like very like abstract and like idealistic ideas about like capital and labor and class war and stuff, and I think this is like important. But we also need to remember that we fight to live in a world, and for that we need to take care of the world and we need to engage with it. You have like people that are, especially like even in the left, a fascination for the rural lifestyle as like a place that is like a golden age. It will be better with like less capitalistic production. We start like going into like more local supply chains instead of global supply chains. It's true to some extent, but like it's also a very like clean view of like what the countryside is. And I say that as someone that hasn't grown up in the countryside, but I do understand that like life there is not necessarily like funny. And as much as like the excerpt that we have studied today with like Michiko Ishimure was pretty positive in my opinion, the whole book is a very pessimistic book, because it's set in the past and you know how it will end, right? You know that like the Minamata disease will wipe a lot of like those elements away. You have like deeply you have like deeply sad moments in this book, because the world is, in a very like Buddhist approach, the world is a world of suffering. So you have, I talked about like Omoka-sama. Alice becoming insane. Her family is experiencing like poverty. So that's why they also had to sell their land. You had like other characters that were not mentioned here that got like, because of like economical conditions, they became like alcoholic. There's a chapter, maybe you have seen that like in the table of content here. Oops. The 16-year-old prostitute, you have this idea of like, you know, the exploitation of like woman body, because this is also like a big theme of like the book, is that like it's really a world of men. And by men, I mean like masculine people, right? Like male. And that like women have been like put on the margin of society. And so you have like this very like pessimistic description of like Minamata to some extent, or this like description of like suffering. There's a passage at some point, and this is the chapter just before that, where the hairdresser of the village is basically trying to leave to go to Tokyo, and she got caught by her father, and her father is like beating her up because she's too useful in the village. She's making money. She needs to stay here, like to bring money to him. And this is like a very sad moment of like of chapter 6, so the chapter just before, right? And that's also why chapter 6 is followed by chapter 7 that we have analyzed, that is more beautiful or gentle, because it's also like a way of atoning again for the cruelty of like human people, of men, that are particularly cruel with like women. And there is, I think, this very like romantic aspect in like Ishimure's literature, where there's no meaning in existence. We need to create our meaning ourselves. And what she proposed is a path of light that we could follow. Maybe we will suffer, maybe there will be like setbacks on the way, but if we keep like all those stories close to us, then we will know what kind of world we want to create. A world of happiness, a world where we'll be like in touch with everyone. So yeah, don't take from just like this short, or maybe not that short, like excerpt that we have read, that like the Camellias is like a very happy book. It's really not a happy book. There's like very magical, very like beautiful like passages. Minamata is always described with like the sea as like a wonderful place. You have the beaches, you have like the mountains, you have shrines, you have so many things. You have all those spirits, but you have also people struggling, and the roots of disintegration were already here. Disintegration will happen in the future, and the question is now in our society, what do we do? What do we do now to rebuild a new world? And that's a very open question. And Ishimure didn't really have like an answer for that. For her, the answer was passing stories. But maybe you and I will have like a different like outlook on those things. But I think it's really like a book that is opening your mind to this idea of like, what if, and yet, and what do we do? I've talked to a handful of large-scale farmers going into it with high expectations of helping the local community, and then ending up drawn in depth and obsessed with right-wing politics that cater to economics hardships. Politics hard or hard sometimes. Exactly. Disregarding or disincentivizing other parts of running society. Because again, like there is, as you say, like high expectations, but also being disconnected from like the local community, and also like coming with the expectations of like you helping people, but like those people, they don't want to be helped, they want to live with dignity. And I think it's like two very different things. Like I think people, where they live in their own like countryside and all, they know what is needed for their place to become good. And most of the time it's like funding like things that they want, that they need, funding schools, funding public services and stuff like that. They don't need rich people coming to the countryside to help them. um, and I think that's kind of like the point of like all those stories that are more, that are showing that like the world of those people is like we don't need to think about people living in the countryside as statistics, or very bluntly speaking, idiots, people that don't know what they're talking about. They have their own world, and we as like foreigners of this world, we need to engage with it like in good faith and listen to them first. And I think again, like it's really about like listening, speaking, being able to speak, and also like listening to the people speaking. So a very like symbiotic relationship between all of us and all our different perspectives. Again, in Lake of Heaven, the protagonist is learning from the others before coming back to Tokyo and kind of like making something new in his life. We don't know if it will work or not, but at least he has found a potential path to happiness and to belonging in the world, and in our society, that is what matters. Okay, I think we are done here. We have been here for 3 hours. So thank you very much for following me today. I don't know how how it felt. I feel like I've been yapping for like 20 million years, and I haven't stopped like for one moment. Um, but yeah, that's like my reading on this like excerpt, and like a kind of like a showcase of like how I interact with text in my research. Kind of like both this like high view of like the text, and also like more like close readings to have like specific sections to analyze, as we did in here with like the transformation into a fox section. So the program for next week, I have absolutely zero idea. This is like up in the air. I have like many things to do. I'm like juggling between like 4 different projects, like the video essay and many other things like in the backstages for me that are not necessarily like VTuber related. So I think I will explode very soon. So I want to stream at least once. We will not like it could be like, it can be like a yapping stream. I don't know exactly, but I'll see you at least once next week, I think, and then we can like try to think of like other weird concepts that we want to explore. I might start my cooking die to creeps. Yeah, this is because in French, like it's jonglé, which is closer to like jungle, but in English it's juggle, which is like very weird to me. But yeah, we'll see what we'll do later next week in the Discord server. Thank you for coming today, and now I don't know. I go to sleep. Bye bye.